Lisa Beelam. I'm the branch manager for Coldwell Banker for the Roseville and Auburn offices, and as you know, part of the Education Committee. And really excited to be here with you guys to talk about this contract. I definitely wanted to wait until I saw it in action and I saw it in the field and how it's playing out, and it's a lot of fun and interesting things. Absolutely love this new revision of the contract, and I think you guys will too, or you do, as you get a chance to learn about it and really know it in detail. Most of the action items, as you know, are on the grid, right? The first 3 pages. So when you're reviewing a contract, everything's in there, but it's still really important that you know all the following pages because that's where all the rules are, right? That's the stuff that keeps us out of trouble and helps us whenever we do run into trouble because it's the guardrails for us. So we have covered a huge chunk of the contract so far. And the way I went about it was I talked about the grid and then I flipped into the section of the contract in the back. So we are almost done with this thing, or I'll just say we've got a good chunk of it done. So this morning we are starting with the section of the grid that's called time of performance. And then we're going to, again, flip back and forth and discuss the items as we go through. So in this first section, you guys can all hear me well, right? All right. In this first section of the grid, where we are, of time of performance, it speaks to the time periods. We already talked about our contingency timeframes. We spent a lot of time last Friday discussing our contingency timeframes. So these are other timeframes in the contract. Seller delivery of documents. We're talking about all of the things that the seller is contractually obligated to get to you. So that's going to be any disclosures like the TDS, transfer disclosure statement, your lead-based paint, any reports that the seller contractually agreed to provide, maybe the prelim, that's the time frame that the seller has to get you those documents. So if you're writing up a short close and you want a short contingency period, you want the buyer to be able to remove their contingencies quickly, you want to make sure that these time frames match, because if the seller has to provide things to the buyer in order for the buyer to make a decision, then the seller's time frames need to be shortened if you've shortened the buyer's time frames. That makes sense, right? We also, the escrow companies have like strong arm car and said, you know, we want to make sure that these naughty agents get us the things that we need as well. So you will see that in a contract, the escrow company will send out instructions and statement of information and different things that they need from our clients to be able to make the transaction come together. So now we have a period of time to get back to the escrow company the things that the escrow company has sent out. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. Also, another thing that has delayed getting the transaction going and process is paying for the HOA documents. Somebody has to pay for those documents before the HOA will release them. So now that's in the contract, and you can designate the time to pay for those documents. It defaults to 3 days, which is wonderful because I think it's 5 days, right, that you have to review them and have them back. So within 3 days, unless you change that, the escrow company needs the cash so they can pay the HOA company to order those documents. Smoke detectors, smoke alarms, CO detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, right? Those are at 7 days. That's really important because if you're getting an appraisal, the appraiser is going to check, especially on an FHA or VA deal, to see if you have a smoke detector and a carbon monoxide detector. And if you do not, they're not going to be able to complete the appraisal. And so that can definitely hold things up. And we're going to talk about it because they've added a section in the contract that says now that if those things aren't in place, then we can have the buyer put them in place and then charge the seller, right? So that's a new thing to the contract as well. If the smoke detector, and I'm going to get to it in the section, so we have, according to this, 7 days to get the smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector in place so that the appraiser can come in and make sure they're in. If they're not in within the time frame and it costs the buyer money for the reinspection, the seller can be held responsible for that cost. So that's new to this contract.
Doesn't it say in here too that if there is a reinspection for appraisal, that the seller has to pay for that reinspection?
That's what I just said. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
You said the buyer.
If the buyer ends up paying it, they can recoup the money from the seller. But we're going to get into it. We're going to read it straight from the contract. All right. The next section that I want to talk to you guys about is items included and excluded in the contract. And I think it's really important that we really have a great understanding of this section. I think if you're going on a listing appointment, you want to break out this section and talk to your seller about it. So your seller really knows and understands what's expected that the buyer is going to be able to keep of theirs from that home, so that they can prepare their home. If there's things that they don't want to be a part of the transaction, they can make sure that they either remove those things or they contractually show that those things aren't going with the property. So we're going to dig into that. But another thing they did to make our lives easier and simpler was they added this section to the grid. So they added this section to the grid because sometimes there's things that are ambiguous, right? So the contract, we'll see on the next page, goes into detail on exactly what items are included and what items are excluded from the contract. But, again, there are things like, it'll say all refrigerators. Well, does that include a wine refrigerator? You know, it'll all built-in appliances. Well, is this built in or not built in? So just to make things crystal clear, you can go through on this section in the grid and check off the things that you want to make sure are included. And they made a list of all of the kind of things that keep coming up, like video doorbells, right? Like whose Ring doorbell is that? Does that stay with the property or does it go with the seller? Well, even though the contract is really clear, they added this section just so that you can be clear as a buyer when you're writing your offer. I want the Ring doorbell. I want the wine refrigerator. You know, funny things like the mirrors in the bathroom. To me, that's a no-brainer, but for some people, that's an issue, right? So maybe if you have a template, there might be things on here that you're like, but of course they go with the property, like the bathroom mirrors, right? That's kind of checked. Like above ground pool and spa, all those things definitely. The above ground pool, but we can check the box so that everybody's crystal clear going into it. And then there's a box where you can put additional items. And below that, you can say items that you want excluded from the property. But what I really want to enforce and make clear is that regardless of what you check on that page, the rules are on page 6, section 9. It's very clear of what we can consider included and excluded. So let's jump into that. The first thing I want you guys to know is it says, items listed as included or excluded in the MLS, any flyers or marketing materials, disclosures are not, in capital letters, included in the purchase price or excluded from the sale unless specified in this paragraph. So this comes up quite a bit. You'll see that maybe the washer and dryer are included with the sale. But if you don't indicate that in the contract that the washer and dryer are included with the sale, then you're not going to get the washer and dryer. And as an agent, you might get to buy a washer and dryer for your client, right? So it's really important that even though it says it in the MLS, it still has to be in the contract. Great, thank you for letting me know that you're willing to give us those things. Let me make sure that I check that box in the contract so that my clients get it. Sometimes our clients even see flyers or ads that we don't see, that we're not aware of. I've had situations where buyers saw a flyer that the appliances were included and assumed they were coming. The agent didn't ask, and so they thought, we're getting them. It was never discussed, and then there was a problem. The agent got to buy them a very nice set of appliances, right? So just be real careful with this section. This is the one that usually costs us a little ticky-tack dollars. Well, it's not ticky-tack when it's your money, right? But be really careful with this. And whether you're working with a buyer or seller, I think it's worth taking the time to go over this section with them so they really understand. And then I love that they added the grid right in the contract, so it's really easy for you and for them to think about what items they're expecting to keep and what items they want to keep. But let's dig into this paragraph. So I'm on page 6, section 9. We've already talked about it. Just because it's in the MLS or flyers, it's not included. But let's be specific about what items are included. So we used to just say all existing fixtures and fittings that are attached to the property. And that was all the explanation required, right? And then we have us in the field, and we find that we need way more explanation. So now this section has spread all the way down to the bottom of the page, right? So it's very detailed. All the electrical, mechanical, lighting, plumbing, heating fixtures, ceiling fans, that's another one that becomes a challenge. Like, if they really love their beautiful decorative ceiling fan or chandelier, they might choose to take that down and just put up a standard one so that they want to take that to their next place. It's meaningful to them. That's something they should think about doing before, because in the way the house looks when the buyer goes to see it is what the buyer is going to get. They can't decide later they're taking it down without having an agreement between both parties to change that. Okay, where was I? Ceiling fans, fireplace inserts, gas logs, grates, solar power systems. That's another one. Built-in appliances and appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made. A built-in appliance is going to be anything where you've got your cabinets and then there's basically an opening and the appliance slides into the cabinet. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's like a dishwasher built in. It could be a stove that just fits in to a space. If it's at the end of the cabinets, then it's considered freestanding, but if it's sliding into a little slot, that's considered built in.
Really? I didn't know that.
That's why I'm here. Yes.
What about, like, the cabinets themselves? I have a deal with a guy who's going to take these 2 cabinets in his butler pantry, and I'm like,
No.
"Oh, they're screwed into the wall." He's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter, I'm taking them." I'm like, okay, but that's real estate, that's part of the house, right?
Yeah, he can't take the cabinets.
Who's gonna unscrew 'em?
He can't do that.
Take 'em.
He can't do that.
Unless he put it in excluded, those 2 cabinets.
But it sounds like he didn't. It sounds like he's just saying that he's taking them.
I was shocked. We were
Yeah.
all shocked, and it's like, well, I'm gonna putty the wall and paint it and everything, you'll never know they were there. It's like, but they're cabinets.
Yeah, so he should have had a conversation with his agent ahead of time, and then they could have resolved that, and he could have put that, and the agent could have let whatever buyer know that needs to be in the contract that he's going to take his cabinets, or the smartest thing to do would have been for him to just take his cabinets off prior to showing his home. All right, solar power, appliances, encasements, and then it says whether or not checked in paragraph 3P. So that's telling us right now that even if you do or do not check the box, those things still come with the property. They're still included. Whether any windows, door screens, awnings, shutters, window coverings. Because it doesn't say curtains, it doesn't say blinds, it just says window coverings, right? So that's whatever you have if they're covering the windows. Which includes blinds, curtains, draperies, shutters, or any other material that cover any portion of the window attached. Okay, then we talk about attached floor coverings, television antennas, satellite dishes, air coolers, conditioners, pool and spa equipment. I'm just pausing on all the ones that I've had headaches from. Including but not limited to any cleaning equipment such as motorized automatic pool cleaners. So that's not included.
Wait, like a pool sweep is not included?
Yep. No, okay, it is included. Including pool spa equipment, including but not limited to. So the pool sweep is included, and it says the motorized pool cleaners, pool nets, pool covers. All of those things would be considered included. Garage door openers, remote controls, mailbox, in-ground landscaping. In-ground landscaping, you would think that that would be a no-brainer, but sometimes things are sentimental and personal to people, And so they may think, oh, I'm going to dig that up and take it with me. They must have an addendum giving them permission to do that, right? Water features. So if you have a little water feature thing, you know, that is included. Fountains, water softeners, water purifiers, light bulbs, including smart bulbs. So some people will like go run around and take their light bulbs out of everything because they bought them. All other items specified as included, if currently existing at the time of acceptance. Note, if the seller does not intend to include any of the specified as being included in above because it's not owned by the seller, whether or not placed on the property by the agent, stager, or other third party, the item should be listed as being excluded in paragraph 3P or excluded by seller in a counteroffer. So that's important, right? So if it's like, we know like furniture, staging furniture doesn't go, but if you did put something in for staging purposes, that needs to be listed as excluded or put on a counteroffer, okay? And I am taking the time to read this because it's really important. I don't know, I can't trust that you guys are going to read this later at home. So I really want to make sure that we know and discuss the items that are included and excluded. Okay, now we're.
What item would be placed by a stager?
Light fixture, they could put in curtains.
Well, those were, to me, obvious, but, okay. Light bulbs.
Light bulbs, that's my favorite one. Okay. Okay, another thing that keeps coming up now, like we have so many smart homes, so now it's an issue, right? So let's talk about security systems, right? And I just want to pause. When you guys are showing property, just assume you're on camera. Assume every house you're in and you're showing property, you're on camera, right? So don't discuss any offers that you're going to make with your clients about the property inside the property. When you're doing your home inspections, don't talk about how much you're going to ask for based on what you're finding in your home inspection, because sometimes the sellers are sitting somewhere at a cafe watching and listening to your entire conversation. And then always, if you're, showing property, be super respectful and think about if the seller was standing over your shoulder, would you say something? Would you say what you're going to say if the seller was standing there in front of you? Because they probably are standing somewhere very close listening to everything you say. So just assume every house, that's the policy. Make it your policy and you won't get caught out, okay? All right, let's get back to security systems. That's my first speech for the day. I think we might have 2 or 3 more. Okay, so security systems include any devices, hardware, software, control units used to monitor. Paragraph 3P, all such items are included in the sale, whether hardwired or not. Home automation. Yes.
All these things are connected to our phones now. So is that, how does, that's kind of.
So it does say in here that the phone is not included. The personal device is not included. Get your own phone. All right, home automation. Smart home features includes any electric devices and features including but not limited to thermostat controls, kitchen appliances, not otherwise excluded, and lighting systems that are connected to hardware or wirelessly to control the unit. Computer, tablet, phone, or other smart devices. So it does not include, let's see, wirelessly, connected wirelessly to a control unit, computer, tablet, phone, or any other, or smart device. So whatever it is that's connected to the smart device is included, the smart device is not. Any smart home devices and features that are physically affixed to the real estate property are also existing light bulbs, here we go with the light bulbs again, are included in the sale. Buyer is advised to use, paragraph 3P, am I in the right place? Or an addendum to address more directly specific items to be included. Seller is advised to use a counteroffer to address more directly any items to be excluded. So Buyer wants it, they check it in the grid, seller does not want them to have it, it needs to be on a counteroffer. Non-dedicated devices. If checked, all smart home and security system control devices are included in the sale, except for any non-dedicated personal computer, tablet, or phone used to control such features. Buyer acknowledges that a separate device and access to Wi-Fi or internet may be required to operate some smart home features and security of any smart home features. And the buyer will have to obtain such device after close of escrow. Buyer is advised to change passwords and to ensure that they have the security to any smart home features. So they try to lay it all out for everybody and make it crystal clear so we don't fight and argue. And that's, another reason why I just really want you all to know the purchase agreement, or at least know where to go in the purchase agreement to find the answers to what you're looking for. Because pretty much anything that you're kind of arguing about is probably in here. So you may not remember exactly what it says, but you'll remember it's in there, and you'll know how to search it up and go find it, right? You guys know about control find? So whenever you're looking for something in a document, you can hit Control F, and then it'll bring up a search box, and then you can type in what you're looking for, and it'll highlight in that document where that item is and show you all the different places where that document appears. So if you're looking for something in the purchase agreement, you might try to use Control Find. I know one or two things, you guys, come on. All right. And then flipping over to the next page, we are into the leased or liened items. My next page. Seller within the time specified shall disclose to the buyer any items, any maintenance or other ongoing financial obligation or specified subject to lien, encumbrance in the loan. They have to deliver to buyer all written materials such as the lease, the warranty, and the financing. So this comes up quite a bit with solar, right? A lot, as I mentioned to you guys before, some people don't even know, if they own the solar or if they lease the solar, and it can cause major delays in the closing of your transaction. If you're taking a listing and you pull up to the house and you see solar panels, stop. That's one of the first things you want to talk, maybe the third thing you want to talk to the seller about, and they want to start gathering those documents and information. You don't want to get those things when you're in escrow. You want to have that stuff up front, prepared and ready to go, because, oops, there could be a surprise. They thought they owned it, but actually there's a lease. When people are sitting down and having these consultations, they present so many ideas, they forget which one they go with. Seems crazy, but I see it all the time.
Is that on the title report? Do you remember?
Yes, Janine?
I was gonna answer that.
Yeah.
You wanna know, it is on the title report, as long as it's recorded. We have seen solar that is on the house, and oops, the solar company hasn't had a chance yet to record anything. So yes, if it's recorded, it should be on the title report. I will caution you that if the taxes, if they have not yet updated the taxes, it may not be on the tax rolls yet. So there are sometimes when that's not on the prelim because it's not there yet. So yeah, we can help you even in advance, whether you're the buyer's agent or the seller's agent. We can help you in advance to get those documents that are recorded and show them to you, so you can approach the seller that you're listing a property with, so you can look at the actual solar UCC1, for example, or the solar agreement, for example. So you're the seller, well, I do see something's recorded, let's find out more about that.
Because there's those other liens too, right? Like Empower and those other liens where they may have taken out something to do the windows or other improvements, and that's attached to their taxes. And then sometimes those are required to be paid off.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Most of the time, those are required to be paid off, unless they're all cash and they want to assume your $30,000 obligation. Most people don't want to do that.
so the moral of the story is to pre-open escrow, right? Pre-open escrow whenever you take a listing so that you can get all of this information. And your good escrow officer will look and point these things out to you. Not that you should wait for them to do that, but definitely pre-open escrow. All right. Let's see, let's skip through. The seller has to cooperate with the buyer and identify any software applications, and they have to help the buyer transfer with it, anything that they need to transfer to get everything over into the buyer's name. So that's kind of new to the contract too. I mean, you would think that people would just do that automatically, but now it's like mandated and written into the contract that as you're transferring different agreements, the seller has to participate and help the buyer facilitate that. All right, so those are the items included. Now let's talk about what's excluded. So unless otherwise agreed, all items specified, audio, video components such as flat screen TV, speakers, and other items are not going to be included, right? So just because the TV, this is like old, this came up like years ago when flat screen TVs first came out, people were like, well, they're affixed to the wall, so fine, right? It's like, no, not when it comes to things like flat screen TVs. What you have to do is you have to take the brackets off and patch the wall, or leave the brackets up, right? So that's it, but the TV is not yours just because it's affixed to the wall. Same thing with furniture that is screwed in for like earthquake safety stuff. Like sometimes people will, screw the dresser to the wall to make sure it doesn't tip. That isn't, even though it's attached, it's not affixed. That would not be part of the property just because it's screwed in, okay? All right, that is good on items included and excluded. But again, I would just say this is a conversation. You would bring a lot of value to your listing appointment if you went over this piece in your listing appointment, and your seller would appreciate you bringing up anything. They may not be thinking about it at the time, but if you walk the house with them and talk about what's going on, what's in the backyard, what do they have in their entryway, maybe there's some water features or fountains and things that are sentimental to them, maybe they have some potted plants, other things that are really important. They really want to think about that before they put the house on the market and before they present the property to the buyer.
Wait, you said potted plants.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure potted plants is in there, but maybe not. Let me go back and tell you. Okay. All right. Allocation of costs. Who's going to pay for all the stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're talking about in the contract all the time in terms of, I want this, I want that, but who's going to pay for all of this stuff, right? We need to determine that. So allocation of cost. So for all inspections, reports, and certificates, we're only determining who's going to provide the inspection, not actually complete the work. So in the older forms of the contracts, people who have been around for a while used to be able to say, I want you to do the inspection and I want you to fix whatever comes up in the inspection. But they don't want people writing a blank check, right? A blind check. So if you don't know what's going to come up on the report, you can't agree to pay for it. So at this point, all we're saying is who's going to pay for the report or the inspection, not once we figure out what it is, who's going to pay for that work. That would come later on the request for repairs. You guys remember that? Yep. The other thing that I want you to think about is whenever you're checking a box, particularly if you're asking for a report or an inspection, your lender is going to see that those things have been asked for, and they're going to ask to see those reports and inspections, and then they're going to have to include whatever comes up on those in their underwriting, right? So most of the time we say if the buyer is going to pay for it, there's no reason to put it in the contract. We talked about in section 12, I believe it is, that the buyer has a right to do any and all investigations. We talked about the seller has to keep the property clean and the pilot lights on and everything going so the buyer can do whatever investigations they need to do. Remember, as long as they don't like drill holes in the wall. So there's no reason to write buyer's going to get a home inspection, buyer's going to get a pest inspection. Buyers should get whatever they want to satisfy themselves, but it does not need to go in the purchase agreement unless you want to open a can of worms. It will open a can of worms, right? But if you're asking the seller to pay for it, then you need to make sure that that's in writing if you want the seller to actually pay for it. And those are the times that we put it in the contract. But let me tell you that if you put that in the contract, your offer is probably not going to get accepted, like say in a competitive market like this, because the listing agent is going to tell the seller, well, whatever comes up on the report, the lender's going to see it, and then they're going to require us to fix everything. So we don't want that offer. We want another offer, right? So just think about that. When you're checking boxes, be very careful. Think all the way through to the end of what it means to check each box. You guys with me on that? Okay. So let's get into allocation of cost. So across the top, when you're looking at the grid for allocation of cost, you've got, the nice section, then you've got the reference number. We used to always have to type that in, 50-50 split, 50-50 split. No more 50-50 split. When you see both, it means 50-50 split, okay? Unless otherwise agreed and you want to write something else in there. There's a little line after the both where you can say, it's a 70-30 split. It never happens. It's always 50-50, right? And then the last section is for additional items, which we'll go through on each one. So that's going to be the format for the grid when we're looking at allocation of cost. All right, so the first section, what do I have? Home warranty? Why did I put that up there? Let's just go over it since it's up there. Okay, buyer shall choose the coverages regardless of any optional coverages indicated of the home warranty plan, and the buyer shall pay any cost of the plan chosen by the buyer that exceeds the amount allocated to the seller in paragraph 3. So on your home warranty plan, it says, it's going to say, I want a home warranty plan, I want it paid for, and this is how much money the seller's required to pay. If there's additional money required, the buyer has to come in and pay that additional difference. And if let's say the home warranty plan is $560 and the seller has agreed to pay $600, they're not going to automatically bump it up to the next level to use up all of those funds. It's just going to be the cost of it, and that's money you've left on the table, okay? Not that big of a deal, but it's just being clear. Am I not making sense? So if you don't have the right coverage amount on your home warranty plan, let's say the home warranty coverage changed, and you put down $600. Let me go back to this section right here. I know I'm out of order here. Down at the very bottom where it says home warranty plan, on the end, it says cost not to exceed. So you're going to put how much money is being paid for the home warranty plan. I know I'm out of order, but we're just going to deal with it. We can handle this, you guys. Yes. So cost not to exceed, let's say you put $600 on there. But the actual home warranty plan that you requested costs $550. So the escrow company is going to pay that $550 for that plan that you requested, and that's all they're going to charge the seller is the $550. They're not going to automatically go up to the next level of coverage to use all the money. I knew we could handle it. I knew we could. All right. Yes.
You go over the private transfer fees, because I know I just had a transaction and the seller didn't even know that it cost them $6,000 for the private transfer.
It's Q15. She's going to get to that.
I'm going to go all the way down the list and cover each one. I don't know how I got out of order on that page. I am going to go back over everything, I promise. Okay, so now we're back up. Forget about home warranties. We're just one section down. Let me go back here and show you guys where we are. So natural hazard disclosure is what I missed talking about. So let's talk about natural hazard disclosure. I'm just going to go off the cuff, right? No contract documents. So under natural hazard disclosure, this goes through, it's about a 50-page report. It tells you everything there is to know about the property where it's located on the map. So take the home off, throw the home to the side, everything you need to know about that spot on the map, right? That's what your natural hazard disclosure report is going to tell you. And you can either have the seller to provide it, or you can have the buyer to provide the report. The reports cost anywhere from $50 to $120. It's not a big deal in terms of cost of who's going to pay for it, but it's a report that you have to have. You don't purchase a property without having a natural hazard disclosure report. You have to have it. So you're going to check, most of the time, I think it's customary, we check seller. It doesn't matter, again, it's not gonna be a deal breaker as to who pays for the natural hazard disclosure report. You decide who you want the provider to be, who you're getting the report from. Like, I can't say any names because there's people in here that will like stare me down if I say the wrong name. So there's several great providers out there for natural hazard disclosure reports. And then if you want the environmental add-on, you would check the box in the far corner. And that's your natural hazard disclosure section of the grid, talking about that particular report. The next thing is the section that is on, you've got your smoke detectors, your government required point of sale. That's the next section that we're going to talk about, and we're going to go down each one. All right, so my big red line is covering the top of the section. Let me go back, see what I'm doing. Of course, all right. Okay.
There's two of them, two blanks.
Got it, now I know what I'm doing. Okay, so if you want to add in any reports that you want to make part of the contract, right? So here's where I don't want you to put home inspection or pest inspection, because remember what we just talked about, when you make it a part of the contract, then your lender is going to ask for it, then it's going to be an issue with the underwriting and all of those kinds of things. But if you did want the seller to pay for a report, you could add it in right there. Thanks.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
Probably will get exempted too. I was an underwriter as well. I see that on a purchase contract, and I want to see the inspection.
Yes. There are a few reports, though, that we do ask the seller to pay for. Like if you are, selling country property, you might ask for a septic inspection. You might ask for a well inspection, right? So those we do see in the contract quite often. It's the way it goes that you would ask the seller to pay for the septic to be pumped and inspected, and you would probably ask for the well. There's another form that you can use. It's an addendum, and it has kind of like all the country property stuff on it. It's got septic, well, propane, survey, and I feel like there's one other thing on there. So either it can be on here on this section, or you can use that other form. It's like the SWPI something. But if you're selling country property like up in Auburn or Grass Valley or whatever, then you're going to be more familiar with that form. Okay, so those are the optional inspection areas that you can put on there. Now we're back to the smoke detector, but the person who checks that is the appraiser. So those things have to be in place when the appraiser comes out to the property. But who pays for that? Who pays for the smoke detector and the carbon monoxide detector? Almost always seller, because it's their house, it's their property. Buyer's not going to go in. We usually don't want the buyer to go in and start doing stuff to the seller's house, right? It's usually not a good idea to have the buyer go in. So that one pretty much always in your templates, you could check the box for seller. That's a good one. That's an easy one. The appraiser is going to call for it if you don't have them. Yes.
So, sorry, getting back to the well and the septic, if you put them on here, that's okay for the lender to see them?
Yeah, that doesn't cause any red flags. No.
Even if there's a problem? It's not gonna-
Usually if there's a problem, we're fixing it before we're closing. That's not something that, most people are not going to buy a property where the water isn't potable and, where they can't flush their toilet. So it's like, yeah. Yeah, that usually gets handled. If you're buying country property, it's kind of like sellers know that that's one of the things that they need to provide. Yeah.
I just noticed on the next page, on page 416, it says other addenda, and that's where you mark the box, septic well, property monument, propane addendum, cardboard, SWPI.
I was right? It is the SWPI? Okay.
So that's where you mark that.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. I promise you guys, we're going to get to that section. Okay. So now let's talk about this one that's a little bit more sticky and not cut and dry at all, which is the government required point of sale inspection and the government required point of sale corrective actions. So those are a little gray in our area. So in Davis, there's a point of sale transaction requirement. In Colfax, there's a point of sale. It's like something with the sewer. Is there something in Lincoln? No? So outside of that, we don't have any. So most agents on the list side, they don't want to see those boxes checked. They do not. Now, most buyers, you want to check the box because you want to protect your buyer in case there is something and we don't know about it, and we feel more comfortable when the boxes are checked. And this is one of those situations. I told you guys kind of like on day one, writing an offer, you're always balancing protecting your client versus making the offer attractive and competitive. I can't tell you what to do in that situation, but I will say most of the time, if you check those boxes, you're going to get countered. And you guys know you don't want to get countered, right? So, yeah. I don't check the boxes. Yeah. Auction property? Yeah.
Would those government point of sale reports be on the prelim again?
No. No, it's going to be stuff like we are required to make sure that there's low flow toilets and that there's, things in the sinks to make sure that there's like low flow water things. We have requirements. There's just no point of sale checkpoint. You know what I mean? Like we don't have in our county, we don't have anyone who comes in and says these things have to be done before you close escrow. But we do have rules that say when you close escrow, you have to make sure these things are done. There's nobody checking it. So there's no cost associated with it.
So that's that. We've got the water flow toilet.
Yeah.
Is a good example. We have that form. We just, right, okay. That's
Yeah.
But they just don't enforce it.
There's no enforcer.
What is it in Davis? What's the point of sale?
In Davis, before you can close escrow, there is an inspector that comes through and makes sure that everything's up to code. They do a full inspection of the property. It's been around as long as I've known about it, which...
And that's a separate inspection.
That's a separate inspection. That's only in Davis. Don't panic. If you're not selling in Davis, don't worry about it. Colfax has like a sewer lateral thing. Yep. Yes. Yes, but there's no one to enforce it once again. So you have the wood-burning stove thing, and then the seller and buyer sign a document certifying that either it's in compliance or they're filling it with cement or whatever. And it's, yeah, there's no enforcer.
But we're still supposed to do the form. We're still supposed to do the form, right?
Yes, you're still supposed to do the form. I'm only talking about cost. So right now, keep in mind, we're talking about who pays what. And so we're talking about cost associated with these. So when you think about checking a box for point of sale inspections, if there isn't a point of sale inspection, then usually the seller is not comfortable with you saying the seller is going to pay for a point of sale inspection that doesn't exist. That's all. That's all, right? So that's why if you aren't aware of one, then you probably don't need to check the box.
Actually, if you check the box with the seller and there was not one required, didn't you just add, like now you're asking for one? It almost looks like.
You're not asking for one.
The contract is telling you to almost get one, it looks like. You know what I mean? Like if you were to check that box and you don't have one and you put seller to pay for it, now it's kind of, you could argue that, okay, I wanted the seller to do that.
But there isn't one. There isn't a point of sale inspection. There's nobody in our county that comes out and does point of sale inspections. You'd have to make a government entity to do it. I mean, I don't know. My point to all of you is if you check the box, you're liable to not get your offer accepted. So just think about that. Talk to your broker. Make a good decision. Escrow fees. There's always going to be escrow fees, right? For every transaction, there's escrow fees. And what's customary in our area is either seller or 50-50 split. So if it's a 50-50 split, we just get to check the box for both. And then we would indicate on the side that says additional terms what escrow company we're using. Yes, Janine.
I just want to add, please don't track each to pay their own fees, because then that leaves it up to everybody to determine what's fair, and as opposed to just like traditionally buyer, seller, or 50-50.
In Southern California, they have a different method. They have separate escrow company and title fees, and they do each to pay their own fees, but that's not customary for our area. Our area is just buyer, seller, or 50-50 split, and then you put who the escrow holder is. It's for the whole state. Yeah. All right. So that's escrow. Keep it simple on the escrow company. Same thing when it comes to the title insurance policy. It's customary seller pay. You guys could argue with me. Maybe you think it's something else. And then our escrow company and our title company are the same here in Northern California. So it'd be this, you don't even have to put anything on that line because it says if different from the escrow holder, right? So if you already put who the escrow company is under the escrow, you don't have to put anything when it comes to the title company. Yes?
So under escrow fees, it says buyer, seller, both, and underneath it says each to pay their own.
So both would be a 50-50 split. And that's what Janine was saying about each to pay their own. That makes it super complicated because then they have to figure out which fees go to which party. So that's like a Southern California thing. So up here, we just do the buyer, seller, or 50-50 split. So that's not for our area up here. We would just disregard that box altogether.
And if we already did one, we checked that box, because we thought that box said 50-50?
What does Oprah say? When you know better, you do better. You know what I mean? It's just whatever. They'll figure it out. Yes? So at the top, it says, if both is checked, cost to be split equally unless otherwise agreed. So unless it's 50-50, you don't need to put anything. The only time you need to put something if it's like 60-40 or 30-70 or something like that. So that's cool, right? Now that we don't have to write that in every time. Okay. Keep in mind, right, when you are checking these boxes, I want you to think of every time you're checking a box, especially if you're putting seller, I want you to think of putting a minus sign next to your offer price. Every box you check that you ask the seller to pay for, you're like basically like cutting a little chink out of your purchase price. You're making your offer less and less competitive every time you ask the seller to purchase something. So when a listing agent gets your offer, they see the purchase price that you're offering, but that's not what they use to make their decision. They take that price and then they look at every other thing and they do a net sheet and they go with the net, right? Net to net when they're comparing offers. So it might seem like, well, I'll just ask the seller to pay for everything. But by doing that, you're making your offer less competitive. Every time you ask the seller to pay for something, you're making it a less competitive offer, okay? So be aware of that. The other thing that comes up a lot is a misunderstanding about closing cost credit. So a lot of times people will say, I want all of my closing costs to be paid. And so they think, okay, great. I'll come and I'll just check the boxes for whatever party. But there's still all the costs associated with the loan. If you have a loan, there's still like recording fees. This is just this much of the closing costs, right? So make sure that your clients understand if they're asking you, I want all my closing costs paid, dig a little deeper. What is it that they're actually asking for? Are they just talking about escrow and title and recording fee, and city transfer tax? Or are they talking about all the closing costs, right? Because most of the time they're talking about all the closing costs, and this isn't gonna cut it, and you're gonna have a mismatch at the end of the day. So just dig in when it comes to, when people start saying things, I want my closing costs covered. Okay, now we're talking about, we have two title insurance policies. Whenever you have a loan, you have two title insurance policies. One's gonna cover the buyer, and one's going to cover the lender. The one that covers the buyer is the one that we're checking the boxes for. So we're trying to decide, is it going to be the seller who's paying for that one? Is the buyer going to pay for it? Is it a 50-50 split? The one that covers the lender, there's no question, the buyer's paying for that. Okay, it says it right here. It's not just me. Q9, it says buyer, lender, title insurance policy. There's no boxes to check. It just says buyer. Okay? And then now let's talk about county transfer tax.
The seller's not allowed to pay the buyer's?
You can agree to that, but it's assumed that the buyer's going to pay that as part of their closing costs, as part of their loan fees. Everything's negotiable, right? But that's not something that's in the contract meant to be negotiable. It's a fee for the buyer's loan that the buyer's going to pay, unless otherwise agreed. County transfer tax, every county's going to have a transfer tax, and it's like 1.1 to every $1,000. So you're always going to want to have in your contract who's paying that county transfer tax, and it's almost always seller, right? That's something that I think sellers just know they have to pay. Unless you're really, really trying to make that offer competitive, right? You're like, I'll pay everything and anything, I'll do it. But city transfer tax is, sometimes there isn't a city transfer tax. Like, I don't think Placer County has any city transfer tax. Certain areas of Sacramento do. You got to know in your town where you're, whether or not there's transfer tax. No, but the title company can give you a list of cities that have transfer tax. You can ask your escrow officer or sales rep to give you that. They have like little cheat sheets that they can give us. If you're dealing in Placer County, there isn't any city transfer tax, so that makes it super easy for us. But if you're in Nevada County, I don't know, and I know some parts of Sacramento. Nevada, no city transfer tax either? What about El Dorado? No. Oh, wow. Just Sacramento. Are there any other cities that we should know about?
Not locally, but in the Bay Area, there are exorbitant amounts. It's
Yeah.
Berkeley and San Francisco.
Oakland is huge.
You really want to have the most current. And so one of the ways you can figure all this out is if you have the property, we can do a net sheet for you, and we can show you what the city transfer tax is. Or we can just give you a list of all the cities in the Northern California area, if you like, that have a list of the city transfer tax.
And most companies have apps, right, that you can put all this stuff in, right? Your escrow, your title company will have an app that you can use when you're writing an offer. You can just put in the address and figure all that stuff out. Their app will help you do all that stuff. So just talk to your title company sales rep to hook you up with all that cool stuff that they have for us. They used to send us on trips to like Mexico and stuff. Now they give us apps. Okay, we got the transfer tax done. I got to speed up. HOA fees, if there are HOAs, right? Don't check that if there's no HOA. You should know that. So the HOA fee for preparing disclosures, it already assigned that to the seller. And then the HOA certification fee, it already assigned that to the buyer. And then the HOA transfer fee, we get to decide. Okay? Private transfer fee, I don't see that very much. I don't know if I don't live in the right area. Tell us, Janine. What is it?
0.5% in Roseville for West Park. There are some properties that have that. And of course, there is Sun City. Thank you. I think it's 3,500 or something.
And is that, do you usually see 50-50 seller pay?
We usually see right now in a competitive market, we see the buyer paying that 3,500 consistently.
Buyer paying the $3,500 consistently. Okay. Did you guys hear that? Okay. Good. So that's the private transfer fee. Somebody asked me to talk about that. We talked about it.
Oh, yeah, you wanted to know about that. Where did you have a $6,000 fee for a private transfer fee?
Yeah, that's what the First American title.
Where was it?
It's off of Fidemit.
Was
that the 1%? There's one out there that's a 1% every time you sell a house.
It's a 0.5%. It was probably a $1.2 million house. Yeah. They don't remember that they have it, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Do the net sheets, you guys. It'll save your butt. Do your homework. Okay, let's move on. And then there's another section for fees or costs, another blank option section where you can add something in if there's other fees or costs that are associated with your particular transaction that need to be added on there. Those are kind of just like blanks. And then we already talked about the home warranty, right? Remember that? All right. Look, I had all these slides. Oh, okay. I wanted to talk about this section, which is the last piece in the section that says other terms. I want you to stay away from other terms. There's a card form for everything, you guys. So before you start writing your own legal language, because that's what you do when you start putting things in blank, need to write anything in other terms. There's probably already a CAR form for it. So if you see yourself wanting to write in there, like stop, pause, talk to somebody, see if there's already a better CAR form than you writing up whatever you're writing up. Probably already says it in the contract. Trust me, it probably already says it somewhere in the contract. Yes?
I just wondered if you should write see attached form,
So there's a section in there that shows what forms are attached. I think that's next. All right. So this is the section where you can make documents a part of the contract. Again, anytime you make something a part of the contract, in order to have a fully executed contract, that piece has to be in there and that piece has to be fully executed as well. So I just caution you on box checking. Careful on your box checking. You can use something and it can be part of your transaction without you making it a part of the contract, right? So just keep in mind, if you make it a part of the contract, it's got to go kit and caboodle. Is that how you say that? Kit? All of it's got to go to the lender. That's the one I always think of, like, whose eyes do I care about seeing this? If you say the transfer disclosure statement is part of the contract and check the box, now the underwriter has to review the transfer disclosure statement. And they have to look at that and decide if there's something that they want to call out or have fixed or make an issue with. So you're still going to do your transfer disclosure statement because it's a statutorily required disclosure. Transactions, and so what they've done is they said, we don't need a whole separate purchase agreement. We'll use the same purchase agreement and we'll just use an addendum to address the particular needs of these different types of transactions. So your probate, your manufactured home purchase agreement, tenant-occupied property, tenancy in common, stock cooperatives, or others, right? Those used to be their own purchase agreement. Now you'll use this purchase agreement for those and then just use the addendum. Other addenda could be like addendum number 1. Let's say you want to write something that you want to include in the contract and you want to make sure that when you're agreeing to these terms, you're also agreeing to the terms of the addendum, and so you're making it a part of the contract. You would check that box, put addendum number 1, and then the contract plus addendum number 1 is the full purchase agreement, and everything would need to be fully executed. If they don't agree to the addendum, then they don't agree to the purchase contract because you're making it all together. Backup offer addendum, we're going to talk about that and get into that. If this is subject to a backup offer addendum, you would check that box and then put that in there. We talked about the septic, well, property monument, and propane addendum. So I did have them all. That's the SWPI. That was the one that we were saying that you could either put that you're getting a septic inspection or you could use this form. some people use escalation clauses. So you could say, you know, you guys know what an escalation clause is? Okay. Some people do.
That's a good example.
Okay. Move on, right? Okay.
What is an exclusion?
An escalation clause. An escalation clause is where you want to make your offer better than the next offer without making your offer better than the next offer. So you would say, I'm offering you $1 million, but if another property comes in higher than mine, I'm willing to go higher than that one. But here's the problem with escalation clauses. They go, I'm willing to go $5,000 over the highest offer, not to exceed $1,050,000. Guess what I'm going to counter you? $1,050,000. Just write $1,050,000, right? So that's you got to give away your. You got to tell. Just write your best offer. Yes.
What about a non-disclosure clause
With your offer?
It's not getting shopped.
Yeah.
Would that just be under other? Because I don't see it listed.
You could, but keep in mind, we talked about that on day one. So if I tell you, if I submit my offer with a confidentiality agreement, and I say that you can't review my offer, and then therefore your offer doesn't get shown, doesn't get reviewed.
Plus, that wouldn't be added, you wouldn't put a check mark for, because you're supposed to send that first, right? You're not supposed to put a check mark for that. You should send that first.
You should send it first if you want them to agree. So the way it should be done, you send the confidentiality agreement, they agree, and then you send over the offer. But most people send the confidentiality agreement with the offer. Okay, seller buyer advisory. So here's advisory. So there's several that are already checked because they already made them a part of the contract, added them in. That's why we call it a packet and not just the RPA. It's the whole thing. And then there's a few other things that you can make part of the contract, which I never recommend. I'm like, use them, but you don't have to make them part of the contract. You got your wildfire, your trust advisory, and then so on and so forth, different ones. All right, let's get into section 11, which is, I think that's the end of the grid though, right guys?
Yeah, that's the end of the grid.
Should we dance or something? The grid is done. Yes.
Defensible space one, the seller has to fill out for the Placer County up north. The wildfire, that's a totally separate thing from this one, the WFA, I'm sorry, the WFDA.
WFDA.
That's the wildfire one.
We have to have those, yeah.
Is that the same thing as defensible space?
No, it's two separate ones. So there's wildfire disclosure, which just says, hey, you're in California. California burns every year. That's the wildfire disclosure one. The other one is two kind of documents in one. The first one is about defensible space. So it's asked, like, what have you done to the property, or what items make the property vulnerable? It's more like that. Do you have these particular items, and you have to check off which things might make the property vulnerable. And then the second part of it is if it's in a high fire or very high fire zone, who's going to have the inspection from CAL FIRE? Is it going to be the seller? Have they done it? Or is the buyer going to be responsible for doing it? In a nutshell, that's what that form is about. But guess what? On May 13th, we have the fire chief coming, and we also are going to have a class specifically on that form, so you can get more detail then. May 13th. Okay, let's talk about the statutorily required disclosures. I've been talking about them kind of on and off with you guys the whole time. You're like, stop saying statutorily required. Just stop saying it, lady. But these are what they are, and they're in section 11. These are the disclosures that are required. So you've got your lead-based paint. You've got your natural hazard. So we talked about that report that's required, fire zone, flood zone. Your transfer disclosure statement, your seller property questionnaire, or if you're exempt, your exempt seller disclosure. Your AVID, which is your disclosure that you're going to do, which is attached to the transfer disclosure statement, but it's your version where you're going to go in and make note of anything that you see visually in the property. Your FHDS is the form I was just talking about. That's the fire hardening one. That's now required. And then I have in parentheses the DIA. That's the Disclosure Information Advisory. That's just my recommendation. If you're giving all these other forms, I would also give the Disclosure Information Advisory because it explains to your buyer and your seller what they're getting and how to fill out the other forms. So I really like that Disclosure Information All right. So let's talk about the lead base. This is not what I thought was coming up. Did I skip? Why do I have different stuff on my pages? Oh, lead-based disclosure. Here we go. I think I'm supposed to be back here. Okay. Your statutory required disclosures. Again, I said your TDS, your NHD. Your TDS is only considered fully complete. I'm down on section 2 of this page where it's highlighted and it said it's considered fully complete if the seller has completed the section titled Coordination with Other Disclosure Forms. So that first box on your transfer disclosure statement, the first section, is about whether or not there's other reports. You always want to check any and all reports received by the buyer, right, on your transfer. You don't have a copy of it in your file. I'm just telling you mentally. It's going to say, are any reports included or are there no reports included? You're going to say any and all reports included from the buyer are going to be part of your TDS. Something has to be on one of those 3 check boxes in order for it to be complete. Section 2 has to be completed and signed by the seller, and the inspection disclosure 3-page form where you go through the property room by room and jot down anything that you see that would affect the value or desirability of the property without using any adjectives and not diagnosing any problems. Just describing. Okay? So that's when you have a complete TDS. It doesn't matter if the buyer has done their section or if the buyer's agent has done their section. A TDS is complete when the seller has completed the seller part and the listing agent has completed their part. That's when it's considered complete. It doesn't mean that buyer shouldn't do their part. It just means that it's complete at that point. Because the reason that's important is because when you receive the complete TDS, when it's done and complete, they will always have an out. So they've got a 5-day window from the time they receive a complete transfer disclosure statement or TDS. And so they have to tell us what complete means. And complete is when the seller and the listing agent have done their part. You guys with me on that? All right. Let's roll then. And remember, the agent is going to disclose anything that affects the value or desirability of the property. And whenever you're asking yourself or the seller's asking yourself, should I disclose that? If you have to ask, the answer is probably yes, right? The only reason you wouldn't want to disclose it is because you think it's going to affect the value or desirability of the property, right?
Quick question, if it's a trustee sale and the father died, son's getting a home, but he's doing all this remodeling, he happens to be a builder, but he's like, well, I don't live there, so I don't need to do the TDS or the SPQ. But he's in there every day doing all this stuff. He's still TDS.
Good question. So even if exempt from the TDS, you're never exempt from disclosing what you know. So you can recommend that he use the TDS and SPQ as a guideline of what types of things we are looking for him to disclose. He might be exempt from the form, still has to say, if he did all these things and put all these things in the property, he should be letting the buyer know everything he did and everything he knows about the property. All right, so the exempt seller disclosure, that's what we were going to talk about next. So if the buyer, if the seller is exempt from the transfer disclosure statement, they would also be exempt from the seller property questionnaire or the SPQ. And in that case, they would do the exempt seller disclosure or the ESD. If the seller becomes aware of anything after the fact, then they would do an amendment to any one of those forms and add on anything that they were newly made aware of, and that would give a new 5-day window. However, if they get information from a report that is being provided to the buyer, they don't have to go back and update their documents, right? Because the buyer is getting that information from the report. All right, lead-based disclosure is another one of the contractually required disclosures, and it's only for properties built prior to 1978. If it's built after 1978, you don't have to do it. TDS is required, or if it's in a high or very high fire severity zone and built before built before 2010, January 1st, 2010. Then the seller has to provide the statement. The defensible space, which is, it's called kind of all in one form now, please stop calling me, is required whenever a TDS is required and whenever it's in a very high fire zone, or whenever it's in a high or very high fire zone, then you have to do the defensible space disclosure. Again, those are all in one form, and that's the criteria that you have down at the bottom for when they're required. All right, waiver of statutory lead or other disclosures is prohibited. You cannot waive your statutory disclosures. You have to do them. That's why they're called statutory. They have to be done. Return of signed copies. The buyer shall have within the time specified (5 days) to deliver any disclosure specified, defensible space, whichever is later, return signed disclosures, and the applicable. So we've been talking about that all along, about that 5-day window, that they have 5 days after the time they receive it to sign it and return it. And if they do not, then it's their get out of jail free card, right? So after that 5-day window, if they see something in those disclosures that they do not like, they can cancel. So if any disclosure specified or subsequent amended disclosure is delivered to buyer after the offer, we've talked about this, after the offer, right? If they get it before the offer and they sign off, they don't get the 5-day window. But if they get it after the offer, the buyer shall have the right to terminate this agreement within 3 days. That's going to be something that you're going to want to know where that is in the contract, because that's going to come up and you're going to need to use that. So that's section 11G on page 8. Okay.
More quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Can a buyer put in 2 offers at once and cancel one of them based on the fact that they didn't read a TDS in time in the 5 days?
So buyer has to make all offers in good faith. So if the buyer makes 2 offers, they're supposed to be able to buy 2 houses. Can they play a game, or do they play a game? They do play games. But technically, when you make an offer, it has to be in good faith. Yes?
You could shorten that
It would. You could. I don't know how many realtors are like willing to get in their car and drive to somebody's house. You could, if it was important, you could do that. But the best thing to do would just be to deliver it before they accept your offer, right? Then you don't even have to get in your car. Okay, so withholding taxes. Buyer and seller hereby instruct escrow company to withhold the applicable required amounts. And so that's your FERPTA, right? So what we're talking about here is your FERPTA, or what's the long form called? What's it called? Foreign, yeah. So this is a section of the contract that says your FERPTA is required. Here's the thing about the FERPTA. The FERPTA says that if you are disclose whether or not they have a social security number or a tax identification number. It's supposed to be done within 7 days, like all the other stuff that comes from the seller. But it never happens. It comes at the end of the transaction in the packet that you get from the escrow company. I can't do anything about it, you guys. It's not me, but I'm just telling you how it all works. So your FERPTA, it should be something that you review and you know up front, because it could be something that blows up the deal. If the seller doesn't know that they're going to have 33 1/3% withheld, 3 1/3? Okay, 3 1/3. 33 is not 3 1/3. There's a bunch of threes. It could blow up your deal, but I'm just telling you how it all shakes out. We never get it till like the last day, but you could force it. You could force it. Yep, you could absolutely force it. But most people, just letting you know, if you get pushed back, I don't want you stressed out. This is kind of how things go. The other thing is your Megan's Law database disclosure. That's your sex offender database. I've got my picture up there. The guy says, you want to be the guy who knows the guy. And what I mean by that is you want to be the source of the source. So you want to tell your client, here's the database, go check it. You want to tell your client where to go. You don't want to be the one going there, checking it, and then relaying the information to them, right? You tell them where to go to check it. You don't go check it and give them the information. It's a huge liability if you go and you say, hey, I got to tell you there's a sex offender across the street from you, but you may not have told them and around the corner and down the street, whatever it is, you didn't give them a complete picture, research it, satisfy themselves, okay? Yes. Yeah, you can even go with them. If you want to really be a great customer service agent, you can go to the county with them, you know, but you should not go get the information and then report back, right? You always want to be the source of the source, not the source when it comes to things like that. Yes?
On the Megan's Law, so if they go and they look at it and they tell you what they found out.
Then you have to slip, fall, bump your head so that you forgot and you don't know anymore.
Exactly.
That's all you can do. Yeah, drink a lot, whatever it is, yeah. Yeah, I mean, because if you know, you have to disclose. Yeah. So try not to know. It's my best advice. Try not to know. I drink every night to make sure that I don't know these things. Every night. Yeah, I know nothing. All right, so when we get into our condominium plan development units, all that information is going to be on either your SPQ or if they're exempt, your EDS. And then the bottom section, it just says that, remember we talked about the fact that somebody has to pay for those HOA documents up front. So either they're going to pull the money out of the buyer's deposit, or they're going to have to collect the money from the seller so they can pay to order those HOA documents if those are required. All right, so section M just says the seller will, within the time specified, disclose known material facts and defects affecting the property, including but not limited to insurance claims within the past 5 years, provide the buyer with permission to contact the lender to get such information, any and all other disclosures required by law. So that's kind of what we were talking about over there, that the seller has to disclose everything they know about the property, right? It's not just what's on the forms. Also, it says provide the buyer with permission to contact lender to get such information. So, interesting. All right, moving on. We are on section 12. We've kind of touched on section 12, so we're going to go through this pretty quickly. I've got to finish today. I'm going to finish today. Investigation of property condition and matters affecting the property. We've talked about buyer's investigation of the property before. So this section just says the buyer shall, within the time specified, do the buyer investigation. It lists all of the investigations that the buyers may choose to do: a general home inspection, check for lead-based paint, talks about wood-destroying pests, and it goes into all the rules of wood-destroying pests. And then any other inspections to determine the property's current physical condition. All other buyer investigations, such as insurance, not specified above, buyer's investigation, advisory, and BIA. So the buyer's investigation is those things. It's like your home inspection, pest inspection, your lead-based paint, figuring out if the property can be insured. All of that's your buyer investigation. All of that goes into your buyer investigation contingency, which we talked about quite a bit already. All right. To the property to see if the property is properly zoned. They can't do anything that's going to have a negative impact on the seller. But the seller must make the property available to the buyer for their investigations. The seller is not obligated to move any furniture or existing personal property. The seller must have the water, gas, electricity, and all operable pilot lights on through the date possession is delivered to the buyer. And the buyer shall, within the time specified, complete the buyer investigations to satisfy themselves as to the current condition of the property, and then either remove their contingencies or cancel the agreement. And then they must give to the seller at no cost all of the reports that they obtained on the property. And that shall not include any appraisal except an appraisal received in connection with an FHA or VA loan. We talked about that last time, right? All right, good, good, good. Title investing. I kind of don't care about this. This is like escrow problems. No, I'm not going to talk much about title investing, but it gets into title investing. We should never give advice about how they should take title or how they should be vested. They should seek their own legal advice to talk about that. Do you want to say anything, Janine?
We have cheat sheets on
Yeah.
this, so that you don't even have to talk to them about it. We'll give you those to give to your client, and we have that conversation with them. So take yourself out of the loop. The title company can help you with that.
All right, let's talk about repairs. So any repairs shall be completed prior to the final verification. So whenever you do your request for repairs and you ask for the repairs to be completed, they're not going to be completed before you sign your contingency removal, right? We've agreed that they're going to be completed. You remove contingencies, and then they have until you do your final verification to verify that those repairs have been done. The repairs can be performed by the seller, but if they are performed by the seller, then the seller has to provide a receipt for repairs performed by others and then prepare a written statement for what they have. I have up here what the final verification of property condition looks like, just a reference point to show you what it looks like, where you're going to say, it's not a contingency, remember, doing the final walkthrough or final verification is a right, but it's not a contingency. You're simply going through to make sure the property is maintained in the same condition that it was at acceptance, and that if any repairs are done, that they've been done correctly, and to check to make sure they're moving, right? We want to see some boxes around here. Yes?
If you have an HOA, and the HOA is supposed to do something to the property, and they haven't done it yet, and the buyer is doing the final walkthrough, and everything else is fine, except the HOA hasn't fulfilled their commitment.
Yeah. So they can, probably what happened is they would just agree that they're going to close because they're assuming that HOA is going to do what they're supposed to do. So you could contractually agree to close if repairs aren't completed. And something with the HOA, that's probably what they would have to do, because they can't force the timeline of the HOA.
Right.
Yeah. Am I not answering it?
Yeah, no, I just have a buyer who is refusing to sign the verification, because I left it blank. I didn't put in there that the HOA, but they know, the buyer knows that the HOA has the letter. They received the email also stating this is a HOA responsibility, HOA will take care of it. And so I sent him the verification for signature, and he's not gonna sign it because,
He doesn't have to sign it, it doesn't matter.
okay.
It's not contingent.
Yeah.
It's not contingency.
Put what in there? You can put it in there, and they cannot sign it or sign it. It doesn't matter. It's not a contingency.
Yeah, I think I'll just redo the verification and have it in there.
All right, I'm not going to get into the proration of property taxes because we know that stuff is prorated. Brokers and agents, mostly just stay in your lane, you guys. Don't do anything that's outside of your lane. Escrow stuff, again, that's why we have escrow people, right? Selection of service providers, we do not guarantee the performance of any vendors that we bring in the property. That's written in the contract to protect us. I'm on number 20, and then the multiple listing service. We have to follow the rules of MLS because we are members.
Wait, go back to where you said we don't guarantee that.
Section 20, it says, agents do not guarantee the performance of any vendors, service, or product providers, whether referred by the agent or selected by the buyer, seller, or any other person. It's nice that that's in the contract for us now, huh? All right, assignment. Buyer shall have the right to assign all of their interest in the property or add someone on. So I'm not going to go too much into this because we talked about this a lot on day one about the ability to be able to assign. Sometimes we see at the end of the transaction, like, oh, I want to add my wife, or, oh, I don't qualify by myself, I need to add someone else on. So to add a buyer, you're going to use that assignment agreement. Whenever you add a person on, whenever they get into the transaction, they must sign everything. I swear to you guys, I get that question from my agents like twice a week. Do they have to sign everything? And they know the answer is yes, but they just figure like, I'll ask because maybe today it's no. But they have to go back and sign everything, right? Even if they're being added on the last day, they have to go back and sign everything. So you do an addendum adding them. You do have to do an addendum adding them. But on the addendum, it says either they've already signed everything or they're going to sign everything. But there's no option except that they're signing everything, okay? Because they're now part of the contract and they have to be kept up to speed. Everything that happened, they have to be in agreement with all of those things, all right? That has to happen. Let's talk definitions. One of my favorite parts of the contract is the definitions because it's what tells us what we're really talking about. So let's get into these definitions. We're going to talk about some of the more important ones because I'm a little bit over time, but we're going to go fast. Can you guys stay 5 or 10 more minutes if you can? I'd like to finish today. Give me 5 minutes, all right? And then we'll get out of here. All right. So definitions, first the definition of acceptance, right? So acceptance means the time the offer or final counteroffer is fully as opposed to received. It used to say received. Now it says delivered. So if I send it to you, it's done. I don't care when you open your email. I don't care when you looked at it. The fact that I sent it to you, it's done. So they added a section to the purchase agreement on the last page. So when you're writing your offer, you got those 3 pages on the grid and you got the final page. That's all you're working on. They added a section where you have to indicate an email or a text message where you verify that you're checking that email, so that when it's sent to you, it's done. And that's changed. It used to be, it was when you received it. Now it's when it's delivered. And I've said that like 3 times on purpose. So that's a new change in the contract. Yes?
I just want to make sure to point out that everyone's checking their timestamp on their DocuSign or their zip form, because I was doing a transaction for someone last year, and they were a day ahead. I advised them to go back and check. They were in the wrong time zone, and their timestamp was
Oh, they were in the wrong time zone. Okay.
They had to redo a lot. So, yep, I'm like, what the heck is this?
Interesting.
So, yeah,
Okay.
something happened with the daylight or whatever. And
Okay.
Like it's literally a
Yeah, like Arizona kind of doesn't do the same daylight saving. Okay.
Go back and check your timestamp when you're, it was.
Yeah. All right, agent means the broker, right? We know that when we say agent, that means your company. Agreement is the document, right? This whole thing is the agreement and everything that we make part of it. As is condition is as is conditioner, seller shall disclose known facts and defects specified. Inspect the property, blah, 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 excuse any condition, cancellation. I'm not going into that. Car forms. It means you must use the most up-to-date car form. You can't use outdated car forms, right? We should all be speaking the same language. You have to use the most recent car form. So if somebody sends you something that's on an outdated car form, you can say, please send it to me on an up-to-date car form. Close of escrow, including COE, means the date that the grant deed or other evidence transfer title is recorded. So it's when things record, that's your close of escrow date. Copy, it's an electronic copy. It could be a photocopy. It could be a fax copy if you're ancient. And then counting days. This is probably one of the most important things where we're counting days. So first of all, I'm going to jump down to days means calendar days. Right? So we're not business days. It's calendar days. I think there's one reference in the contract to business days, and that's the deposit. So it's calendar days. However, delivery of deposit to escrow, it's right there, is based on business days. Let's go to counting days now. So now that we know we're talking calendar days, counting days is done as follows unless otherwise agreed. So the first day after an event is the first full calendar day. So the day it happens is day 0. It's the first day after the event, that's day 1. And ending at 11:59 p.m. So your day is the whole day. It's not when you guys get off work or when you stop working, right? It's all the way till midnight or a minute before midnight. And I don't need to go into, for example, but the thing you need to know is that the last day, if the last day is on a weekend or holiday, it carries over to the next day. So if you're counting days and you count Friday, Saturday, and then the last day is Sunday, it carries over till Monday, but Saturday still counts as a day. It's only the last day that can't be a holiday or weekend. Does that make sense? That part gets a lot of people confused. Yes?
What about if your close of escrow falls on a Sunday? There's no way to fund a loan.
Going to be on Monday.
Okay,
So the last day, the last day cannot be on a weekend or holiday.
okay.
It carries over to the next day.
Tuesday, yeah.
Right. Okay, and then legally authorized signer means an individual who has the authority to sign for the principal. And the reason that I'm specifying that is because we get into our entity buyers and sellers. So maybe it's in a trust, but then the legally authorized signer is a person who has the authority to sign on behalf of the trust. All right, I'm over, and I can finish the rest next time we get together. I only have a little tiny bit. But next time we get together, we have an attorney who's going to be joining us, and he's going to be going over like a summary of everything and pointing out kind of like red flags and like I got yous and kind of getting into like the whole contract as a whole and telling you things to watch out for. So you'll have me probably for about 5 minutes. Before you guys leave, I need your surveys and any questions, and then afterward, he's gonna jump in and start going over the kind of red flags. So that'll be a really good one next Friday, and then we'll be done with the series. I almost made it. Yes? I can't, I'm sorry. Can you come up? I'm sorry. Do you have to legally put it on the MLS if what?
Seller is taking a bottom line offer. I was told that legally we have to put on MLS. And the fact that every offer has to be a written refusal or counter. That, because I'm told that's what we legally have to do now. We can't do a verbal no.
It doesn't say that in the contract.
Because I got, it's a wannabe investor, realtor slash, but I was told legally, yes, you do have to respond, and you legally have to put, you can't do a verbal. You cannot do a verbal anymore. You know, like, you come in a lowball